It's one of those things where where we all need to be reminded of the needs that exist in our community, and we're so grateful for the work that you and your team do, and the way you sort of coordinate and make sure that people can get to the right resource. We are always referring people to love, so we thank you for the work that you do. Faith the size of a mustard seed. We are starting our stewardship month this week. You'll be getting a letter in the mail from Bill Cook, our current congregational chair, and myself, with a proposed budget that has been looked at and reviewed by the various leaders of the church who are responsible for certain budgets, and also by the finance committee, which is comprised of the chair, vice chair, myself, the financial secretary, and the property chair. You will see explicated on this proposed budget, as we do every year, what the actual physical operating needs are for the church. There are some maintenance items that are front and center at in our minds that need to be addressed, but we're going to be prayerfully working with all of you to determine what the priorities will be in addressing those things. Some of those things can't wait, and some of them will need to be deferred. But it's that time of year when we look at those things, and hopefully we're not just looking at the things that are needed to kind of keep the lights on and the fans moving and make us cool in the summer and warm in the winter, or even to keep our parking lot, but those items that have to do with our contributions to the general mission fund of our denomination, to Love Christian Clearinghouse, to other items. Our church, it's amazing every month at the board meeting that our giving has, for the past year or so, actually been above pledge giving. And while that's awesome and that's great, we don't want to take that for granted. So you will be hearing later this week from us about the needs of our church. And I hope that you will think about this not in the same way that you would think about a pledge that you make to a club or an organization that you belong to, but that you would think about your giving, however you give, whatever you're able to give, in a way that reflects what you want this place, this church, this ministry to be about. Giving not only of your money, but considering how you might give of your time and your energy as well. We have been told by Jim and Joy Claffey that this coming paths, as they smile at me, will be their last leading that effort. They've given many years to that. We need to find some folks to come alongside them and take that on. It may be even finding some people in the community who aren't even members of our church who might want to lead that effort on our behalf, and that may be a way to even attract additional members who would be excited and attracted by the fact that this church is engaged in those kinds of ministries. So be prayerful, and we'll begin ministries and testimonies from members next week. Increase our faith. The disciples are almost pleading with Jesus, help us. Jesus sort of begins his particular storytelling with them. And in Luke, Jesus always has a message about the least, the last, and the lost. Jesus is always talking about making the world a better place. Jesus is always talking in Luke about including people who may have been excluded in other areas of society and life. The Jews are living under the oppression of the Roman Empire. They are living under the leadership of their own temple, high priests, scribes, and Pharisees. If you're a Jew in first century Palestine, you don't have a lot of power. You don't have a lot of prestige. You don't have a lot of anything. And the idea that this man Jesus has come along and potentially could be someone who could rip that oppressor off of their neck, lift that foot off of their neck, find a way for them to live in their land that God has always given to them in a way where they could make the choices, live in a land with dignity where they would be able to worship freely without having to worry about paying taxes to the Roman government, without having to worry about Roman soldiers coming along and just sort of taking over their property, raping their women, doing other things that oppressors and giant empires in that day and time would have done. It's an important thing to remember that this is the world in which they lived, because Jesus tells this story that seems sort of weird at the end of this text about making sure that you understand that if you are the servant and the master comes home, nothing really about that relationship is going to change. You're not actually going to be the one who gets invited to sit at the table, but rather your work will be to continue to serve. Your work will be to continue to be a part of this notion of servant leadership. Jesus is really trying to tell them, no matter what you think about who I am and what will happen, I'm not calling you to sit higher up at the table. I'm not calling you to be higher up on the totem pole. I'm not calling you to places of power. I'm calling you to continue to leverage your faith in places of service. So lest you get confused, as the kids would say, don't get it twisted. We're not being called so that we can live and operate in this world with some level of nobility or even privilege, as we've been talking on Wednesday night. We have been called to lives of service. Why are we called to lives of service? Well, because that's what Jesus has modeled for us. And the message that Jesus always has is that he welcomes all. If we were ever to decide that because we believe X, Y, or Z, or because we have A, B, and C, that somehow we are more deserving of God's love, more deserving of God's generosity, then we would be drawing lines that God has decided he won't draw. All means all, we always like to say, and in this sense of service and abundance, even in the sense of faith, Jesus is saying, you all must serve, you all can do the great things I've called you to do, because guess what? You all have faith. He's not chastising them with this story of the mustard seed and being able to move the mulberry tree into the sea. He actually phrases the story to say, if you had, and almost in parentheses saying, and you all do, have faith the size of a mustard seed, you would be able to do great things. The disciples, as we know, are not always the sharpest knives in the drawer, and so they're like, oh, increase our faith. Surely, God, it must, surely, Jesus, it must take so much more than the faith of the mustard seed to do that much. If they had really heard him, what he was trying to do was assure them that their little bitty faith at that point was enough to transform the world. In Luke's gospel, we are constantly moving from Jesus' birth to his earthly ministry, and ultimately we will come to one of the more interesting texts in Luke, where Luke tells us that Jesus sets his face toward Jerusalem. That term means that he has made a decision to go to Jerusalem, and once he's in Jerusalem, the events leading to his death and resurrection unfold. So Luke is building up towards Jesus' ultimate clear decision about what he must do. And Luke is so very concerned about teaching as Jesus taught and reminding not only the disciples, but us, even in our own time, of the importance that Jesus placed on service and loving others, and the importance that Jesus placed on understanding that it is not us who will do all the work. We don't have all that it takes in terms of quantity. We don't have, maybe you do, maybe you are the person who never questions. Maybe your faith is so strong that you are like, faith, no problem. Every problem that comes my way, every day of my life, I walk out of the door saying, I know that with God all things are possible. We say these things, we proclaim these things, we feed ourselves these things. But we all know that there are moments that come where we say, Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. Lord, I trust you for healing, but oh my God, I'm scared. Lord, I know that you will provide my needs, but I'm just concerned about making these groceries last through the end of the week. Lord, I believe, but what will I do if you don't come through? If you were to be honest, you have had those thoughts. You have given breath to those fears. You have faltered somewhere along the line. And yet, in even beginning to stand on just that tiny mustard seed of faith, you are doing exactly what Jesus reminded the disciples that they could do. That he's not calling for a perfect faith. He's not calling for even a perfect sense of generosity. He's not calling for us to be who he is. He's calling us to trust and leverage what little faith we may have at times into his keeping, to rely on that little bit of faith, to trust God to do big things. I have a pastor friend who says sometimes God needs to know that we recognize that without him we're unable to do these big things. It's not our little bitty faith that's a problem to God, it's the absolute lack of it. It's acknowledging, first of all, who he is, who he's able to be, what it is possible for him to do. Faith is not trusting in an ultimate outcome. It is really trusting in God's ability to deliver the outcome. It's a hard thing, this faith. It's a frustrating thing, these tiny little mustard seeds that seem like nothing in the greater scheme of things. It seems so inconsequential that all Jesus would ask for is just that little itty bit of faith. Faith so small I couldn't even pick it up in my two little fingers. And yet, when we think about this church over the last few years, do you know, and I've paid attention to this, that every year for the past 5 years, our giving has exceeded pledges. We have now for 7 years executed a back-to-school fair that was supported not only by corporate gifts and raffles, and we've done a really good job of doing bulk buying, but the giving that many of you have shared around the back-to-school fair doesn't even make it into our identifiable giving on our balance sheet. It's extra giving that you do. It's extra time. It's extra supplies that you just buy and purchase, and other items that you contribute. It's money that you give to Belarus to support the camp and the orphanage there. There are so many times and efforts that actually don't make it onto our sheet. So it's not a matter of whether or not we are giving or whether or not we are loving. Sometimes I think we have the tendency to associate our financial concerns with a concern about the size or even the future of our church. And God is reminding us, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, the quality of our faith, the quality of our souls, the quality of the faith that we have in God to work through us will far surpass anything that we can immediately see on pieces of paper. Anything that we can immediately see by counting heads in a room. There are miracles that happen time and time again because we have this little bit of faith that in awesome moments overtakes us and is bigger than we ever thought it could be. Increase our faith? Absolutely, God. Please do that for us. That's my constant prayer. Increase my faith. Keep me from being afraid. Keep me from seeing limitations. Keep me with my eyes on the horizon. Keep us all looking up to the author and the finisher of our faith. Keep us all looking towards the things that we know God is able to accomplish, even with that little bitty thing of faith. But where will the money come from? Where will the people come from? God says, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can uproot the mulberry tree planted in the sea. You can say, as Matthew says, to the mountain, be thou removed. If you have even the tiniest of faith, that God can do abundantly beyond all that we can ask or think. He will take what you have, your faith, your money. Oh, but I don't have a lot of money. God is not calling for equal giving in terms of dollars, but He is calling for equal commitment to giving, equal commitment to share what you have. If you have faith the size of a mustard seed, we can do all that we dream and hope we can do because we are depending upon God. And when God sees that we have faith, every healing that Jesus performs in the New Testament is preceded by Jesus' acknowledgement. Because of your faith, He says, you are made whole. Because you believe I have done these things. Because we believe, God will take care. If you can act on just that tiny bit of faith, that little bitty bit of mustard seed, and offer what you have, God will take it, bless it, use it, and multiply it so that the work of this church can go on. Lord, increase our faith. Amen.